What's up, Mecha fans, and welcome back to the channel. So today we are bringing an end to my review series of the Patlabor movie trilogy, talking about the third and final film, appropriately titled Patlabor the Movie 3. But before I get into my thoughts, I want to hear from you guys, so head on down to the comment section below. If you've seen this film, what do you think of it? And while you're there, please do leave a like on this video and subscribe if you are a fan of mecha anime and want to see plenty more videos like this in the future. Prior to actually watching this trilogy of films, I looked up like a general consensus of the three films, which was considered the best, which was considered the worst, and all that kind of thing. The first two were considered really great, second in particular being considered by far the best, but the first also very, very acclaimed. Then it came to the third one, and I heard a lot of pretty negative things about it, negative to mixed things. Having now watched it myself though, I think it's vastly overhated. To start off though, let's talk about the elephant in the room, and that is the Oshi-sized hole, if you will, within this film, because unlike the previous two entries within this trilogy, this one is not directed by Mamoru Oshii, and I think he's one of the main reasons why the first two films work, especially the second one. So, you know, instantly, like immediately, the thought process is, okay, you don't have the same director, it's probably going to be a lesser entry. But I think that it manages to still capture most of what those first two films did, maybe to varying degrees of success. I think there's elements of this film that just feel like lesser versions, if you will, of stuff that we saw in the first two films, but I don't think it completely misses the mark. This is not a train wreck of a film by any means. In fact, I think it does a hell of a lot of things right. One of my favourite aspects about the second film is that the core group of characters are much older, more jaded people within the police force, and that's kind of carried over here as well. It's focused basically on these two detectives, one of which is the more older, jaded detective that, you know, has his ailments and such, and then you've got a guy that's a little bit younger, but I would still say he's in like his mid-30s maybe. So it's not like a, you know, rookie on the job or anything like that. It does still fit into that classic two detective trope that you'd see in the likes of True Detective, for example, or Lethal Weapon. And me personally, like I said, with Patlabor 2, I really like seeing the older characters. It adds like a more mature angle to things, and I think as well in this film, it also adds that extra sense of maturity. Even with that big similarity to Patlabor 2 and the fact that this is more of a slow-paced kind of film, there is still some dramatically different things about this film that are very obviously noticeable. First off, this one opts to go with dealing with biological weapons, kaiju, whereas of course the second one deals more with post-war tensions, political corruption, government incompetence. There's a lot more grounded themes, I guess, in Patlabor 2 as opposed to this one. This one in some way opts to kind of go in this direction of being a bit more fantastical and a bit more fictional. As soon as you bring in a kaiju to deal with, it immediately removes a little bit of realism from the film. Now you can still keep it grounded, and this film generally does for the most part, but also at the same time, you take like post-war tensions and you compare it to dealing with a kaiju. One is obviously more realistic and more grounded than the other, and I've always thought that the Patlabor movie franchise, or just the Patlabor franchise in general, has managed to maintain its groundedness even with the first film. I do think this film would actually work a lot better as its own standalone thing. Not part of the Patlabor franchise, don't slap that title on it because it doesn't really need it. You essentially could have made it a detective story that also has kaiju in it, and I thought that would have been pretty interesting, actually a more unique fictional take on a traditional detective story, and therefore it would have felt unique, it would have been standalone. There also wouldn't have been the expectations of what you expect from the Patlabor franchise, and thus not only would it have helped the film in maintaining its focus and also creating its own identity, but also I think it would have helped with the general public perception and ideas going into it, and therefore maybe it would have actually reviewed better. There is one thing that Patlabor 3 actually does better than the other films in this trilogy, and that's the emotional elements to the story. I felt like with the first two films, the character work is not its strongest. It's much more thematically rich and beautiful to look at, but I feel like this film has a much better emotional core to it. Not that the two lead detectives are necessarily the most interesting characters out there or anything like that, but when you get to the third act, you get this reveal that kind of recontextualizes a lot of stuff concerning the kaiju and its connection with certain characters, and it adds this emotional layer of depth to the story. Then the third act in particular, I thought actually hit pretty well. Not that it had me in tears or anything like that, but for a trilogy where the first two installments I felt a little bit emotionally distant and disconnected from, it was nice to have that bit of humanity to this film, that bit of emotional connection and emotional damage to some of the characters that I do think really helped in making you actually connect with the storytelling a little bit more. But overall, despite its story being a little bit less grounded than the previous two entries in the trilogy, also the fact that it would probably work much better as its own standalone story, completely separate from the Patlabor franchise, I think that Patlabor 3 is another solid entry within this trilogy. It retains a lot of the elements I loved about Patlabor 2 with the slower detective mystery, also two older characters being in the lead, and even without Mamoru Oshii in the director's chair, this is once again another well-crafted film that's got great visuals and animation, really nice style to it, great score as well, and an emotional hook in the third act that really made it a lot easier to connect to on a human level. It may be the lesser of the three films, but it is by no means significantly worse than those other two. So with all that in mind, I'm going to give Patlabor the Movie 3 a B. Before I get out of here though, please do leave a like on this video. Also subscribe if you're a fan of mecha anime and want to see plenty more videos like this in the future. Look out for my ranking of this trilogy coming pretty soon to the channel. And also head on down to the comment section below. Let me know your thoughts on this film if you've seen it. And thank you once again for tuning into Mecha Chat today. I'll see you guys next time.